Well, Darius, Adamczyk, thank you so much for spending some time with me. Nice to see you virtually. It is quite a world we're living in. And I want to start out by taking you back a bit to the pre-pandemic era. It seems like 100 years ago, but this was a moment where Honeywell was already in a bit of transformation. Where were you at that moment in terms of your plan for the company?
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to talk to you, Jason. And we were making really good progress. I mean, we were, I took over in 2017, early 2017, and we're accelerating our progress on the digital journey. And when I say digital journey, not in terms of just being more of a software industrial company, but we also on a digital journey internally as well as externally. And I think that component is every bit as important in terms of offering some of these solutions to our end customers, that is to internal transformation as well. And, frankly, this year we ran into a little bit of a brick wall called COVID-19. But I think that this is something that's a little bit of a temporary setback. We were able to continue a lot of our key investments, both in terms of funding our connected enterprise, which is really our external oriented software business unit. We really continued to funding a lot of our digital initiatives internally. I mean, I happen to have just left a meeting just a couple of hours ago where we're planning already for next year. We're going to accelerate our budgets and investments to become much more savvy digitally, internally, and continue to use all the digital tools.
So staying with sort of where you were, what had precipitated that? I mean, obviously this, as you say, had been in the works, but it feels like, at least from the outside, that was a pretty major strategic shift that you were undertaking, given the company that you had been handed by your predecessor, Dave Cote.
Sure. Well, I mean, Dave did a great job with the company for many, many years. And, I had some advice to say, well, just keep doing what he's doing and kind of run the same playbook. And although that was a great playbook that worked, I mean, you have to continue to evolve. And I think that was really the name of the game. And, luckily I had an opportunity to really do a strategic plan for Honeywell twice. Once when I took over, before I even took over Honeywell, when I was sort of competing for the job, and then I did it again shortly after. And one of the key trigger points for me was the fact that Honeywell there's one kind of common theme throughout all the Honeywell businesses, and that we're basically a controls company. So whether it's controlling aircraft or controlling buildings or controlling warehouses or industrial facilities, we're in a controls business. And when you're in a controls business, it means you develop hardware and you develop the controls software. And we had vast installed bases in all these end markets. We understood our customers well. We understood software. And although we used the data primarily to control the process that we were engaged with, we obviously had access to all kinds of different data. And it sort of triggered a thought that if we use this data differently, we can actually create different value drivers for our customers, whether it's energy savings or productivity or efficiency or safety. All those things were available to us. And that's really what triggered my thought for the transformation to who Honeywell was in the past to what Honeywell will be in the future.
And it's interesting to think about you sort of setting a strategic plan because, you're a little bit unusual, I feel like, in a company of this ilk because you didn't spend your whole career there. You came in via an acquisition, I believe, in 2008. And so I do wonder how that perspective of being sort of adopted by the company and then growing into it, the perspective that gave you.
I think that was unique, and Jason, as you correctly point out, it is a unique perspective because I work for other large companies, but then I also work for small companies. And prior to coming into Honeywell, I ran a company that was $250 million, and that was a really important evolution in my own career, a set of learning experiences that I would have never gained in a large company. In a small company, you have to be agile, you have to do more with less, you have to one day be the key engineer, another day be the manager, and willing to kind of get your hands dirty and operate a lot of the things because you just don't have as much staff. You can't delegate as much. And it taught me a whole series of experiences that I wouldn't have ever had. I mean, initially in my career, I worked for GE and Booz Allen and Ingersoll Rand, but working for Metrologic, where I was the CEO, really taught me a whole different set of skills. And I think that was what the board found appealing, is that I had a perspective that was based on process and rigor that really comes from running larger companies, but also had a little bit of this entrepreneurial perspective in terms of what you have to do to be successful in growing a smaller company, because Metrologic was less than 300 million. And I think that combination is something that really helped me evolve and grow as a professional, and also bring culturally into what we do today at Honeywell.
Well, so as cultural moments go, I feel like it is something that we all share. This last year, a moment across the globe, a moment for our personal lives, so many things have happened. So take us to that inflection point and sort of what you saw initially and what you saw as the year and this crisis took hold, and how you had to respond initially as a company. And then we'll talk about some of your customers as well.
Sure. Well, initially, I mean, we knew something was happening as very, very early in January of this year. And obviously we saw the pandemic first hit in China, and frankly, I caught some grief even during my Outlook call when we wrapped up Q4 and provided guidance for the year and provided guidance for the first quarter in our earnings call. And I think it was late January, early February, and I said, well, we don't really understand this COVID, and granted, for now, it's more or less limited to China, but this could be impactful for the entire globe. And unfortunately, I was right, and I gave a little bit more of a conservative outlook for both the quarter and the year for that reason. And then March hit, and it was a little bit of like a wall. I mean, things really turned for the worse so quickly that literally in early March we were working and everything was fine, and by the middle of March we were kind of telling everybody to go home and work from home. And that very quick pivot to basically operate as normal, and now everybody operate from home other than obviously our manufacturing associate, is unprecedented. I mean, it is, to be able to pivot and do that quickly and efficiently is a testament to the Honeywell team to really enable us to work that way. And frankly, if this was 20 years ago, I don't think there's a chance we could really do this well. I mean, you think about all the tools that we have available, whether it's Zoom or Teams and all these connectivity tools. 20 years ago, none of that was in place. And I think in some ways we're fortunate this pandemic happened when it did, to enable us to continue working as effective as we have been.
So tell me about the operations of the company and what you had to do, and presumably there was a lot of response you had to make to your customers who were having to make similar decisions. What were you hearing as you were having presumably very high-level conversations with your counterparts at companies that you were selling to and working with?
Well, I would kind of characterize as mass confusion and many unknowns. I mean, I'm going all the way back to the middle of March timeframe. I mean, we had to make a decision very, very quickly, and we made a decisive decision that says all of our associates, the non-critical ones, have to work from home. A lot of our customers were also shutting down, but frankly, some of them needed to continue to operate. I mean, we're in the aerospace, defense business, warehouse automation business, industrial safety business. I mean, you can't say, well, I'm going to shut down for a while and not provide you with critical and essential goods. You have to continue to serve your customers, which frankly needed these goods to continue to operate and serve the global population. So everybody was searching for answers. I mean, and what enabled us to really operate is I literally had a daily stand-up meeting with my entire staff every morning at 7:30. We'd do an hour or two call and make decisions, and we were making very precise, very deliberate daily decisions about what we're going to do, how we're going to continue to manufacture, how we're going to continue to operate, how do we provide all of our associates with computers and bandwidth and internet and all these kinds of tactical issues that will enable us to continue to operate. And it may sound trivial, and maybe right now they don't sound as difficult as they were back then, but we really had to scramble because we had literally over 50,000 people leaving the workplace and going home. And how do we enable them to continue to be productive and function as one team? And that was quite a challenge, particularly in the second half of March.
And so when you think about your customers, how did that evolve over the course of the late spring, summer into fall in terms of their needs? Because as you point out, these are customers, especially the aerospace, defense industry, manufacturing, as you point out, they are very much on the front lines of this. Some of those end markets are among the most affected by this crisis, especially when I think about the aerospace industry, to just name one.
Well, we kind of have, I saw both ends of this crisis, because for some of our customers, they basically kind of said, we don't really have any more business. If you think about the airline industry, for the most part, in the month of April, there was very little activity that was ongoing. So that business sort of came to a screeching halt. On the flip side, in the opposite extreme, in our industrial safety business, I had everybody calling me about, how do I secure more N95 masks? Whether it's the medical community or other, everybody wanted these masks. And, so we were dealing with the two extremes. Number one is, in one part of our segments of our business, they were totally shut down and nobody really wanted to conduct any business because they weren't operating themselves. On the other, they had infinite demand for a lot of our products and solutions. So as an example, we made a decision in late March saying we have to stand up new manufacturing facilities for N95s because, frankly, we need them, particularly for consumption in the U.S. and beyond. We just didn't have enough capacity to serve the needs for the medical community, and we were in dire straits at that point. And so we were really trying to adjust both our operating rhythm, our cost, our supply base, to this new reality. And in some cases, it was a complete stop. And in other instances, it was a complete acceleration to give us anything you can get us. And, other segments were like that as well. I'll give you an example. We make sensors for ventilators that the hospitals desperately needed. And in literally a matter of 3 or 4 days, our demand tripled. And then it tripled again a week later. And, so this was the full broad spectrum of activity, from how do we minimize our losses, how do we reduce our costs, to how do we quickly accelerate our capacity and scale up. And both those offered a unique set of challenges.
Well, I think about something you said earlier in the conversation about you're in the business of controls. All of a sudden, I feel like the entire world needed to measure things in a meaningful and an immediate way that we really weren't that concerned about. Tell me about that element, especially when it comes to building management and some of the things you were working on there, where I imagine the demand has only accelerated.
Well, I think the whole world was starving for data. With all of us, and business leaders and government leaders were all trying to get more information and data, both around the disease, the spread, everybody was trying to do projections as to where it may go next, which kind of would help with our own capacity planning, what the needs were. And those initial projections were, for the most part, way off. They were dramatically off as to what the reality was. And, luckily, the reality was a little bit better than the projections that were out there. Not that the reality was good, but it certainly was better than that with some projections that were taking place in April. And, what we try to do is try to decipher through all this data that was coming in, both from the medical community, their governments, our customers, our suppliers, our own people, to really make decisions. And I think that was maybe as challenging as anything, is through this vast data set, and in many times conflicting data set, how do you really make the right decisions? And that was a challenge both for ourselves and as well as our customers.
So fast forward to today, where we're in the midst of a second or third wave, depending on kind of how you're characterizing it. What has fundamentally changed when it comes to your business, or what has changed, at least for the time being, in terms of how you're allocating to different projects, where you're focused? You know, you talked about earnings just recently, and investors, I think, were generally pleased at where you are, in part because of some of the demand you're seeing, but maybe not from the areas where you were seeing it, to your earlier point before.
Right. Well, I think we've gone from a crisis management mode to a mode of how do we plan and how do we help the world emerge from this crisis? Because, I mean, what was needed back in the March, April, May timeframe was more masks, more sensors for ventilators, more PPE, more shields for your face and eyes, et cetera. So that's sort of where we focused, because that's what was really needed for the medical responders, et cetera, to protect them and protect the people, that the patients themselves. But where we shifted to now is, how do we help the world emerge from this crisis? I mean, how do we get back to having fun again, to flying again, to going to the workplace again, to operating the industrial facilities as we always have? And it's the level of innovation, the solutions that we're offering are very different. They're much more proactive about what will happen when things will get back to normal. And I think, like the rest of the globe, we're waiting for the day to happen. But what we're trying to do is, we're trying to be 1 or 2 steps ahead of that and have some of those solutions ready. Because none of us can really exactly pinpoint when the world will get back to normal. It will happen. But we want to make sure that we have some of those solutions available now or soon, so that when we get there, we're much more prepared.
So what are you seeing when it comes to kind of what we expect going next? I mean, I think about some of the products you have in your portfolio around health and safety when it comes to airlines, health and safety when it comes to the workplace. What are you seeing as you talk to those customers in terms of their willingness to spend on it? And ultimately, that's a reflection of what end users are willing to do now and in the near future. Take us inside that.
Yeah, sure. Well, we're engaging with a lot of our customers, whether it be in the aerospace area or building technologies or warehouse automation or industrial, or even the medical, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is they're all engaging, and they're very curious about these what we call healthy solutions that we have, whether it's healthy buildings or the aircraft or plants or warehouse facilities. And, in some stages, we're rolling out proofs of concepts, and other stages, we're already rolling out solutions to our end customers. So we're sort of in different phases of innovation, but they're all curious and they all want these solutions because they know that either they need them right now or they're going to need them very, very soon. So I would characterize the interest as very, very high, because everybody wants to have their customers or their employees return to a safer workplace or their place of business where they conduct business. So I would characterize the interest as being very, very high. But we're also branching out to some new customers. I'll give you a very specific example. We know the world is going to need many more vials for vaccines. And principally, the vials are made of glass. And literally billions upon billions of vials are going to be necessary over the course of the next few years. Well, glass vials are going to be in short demand. So we actually came up with something using some of our own materials called Aclar, to actually give an alternative to glass, which is lighter, cheaper, and frankly more durable than glass. So we're gaining a whole new set of customers in the pharmaceutical industry, which gives them an alternative to what's likely to be in a scarce situation going forward. So some examples of the kind of innovation that we're doing in even brand new areas, because we think we can offer the world something as it kind of comes back to normal.
One of the things I've read about that you're working on is this sort of UV cleaning approach. I mean, these are the sorts of things that, candidly, a year or so ago, I would have thought, yeah, that sounds kind of cool. Now it feels like a necessity. Tell me how that works.
Right. Well, that was a great innovation that happened in our aerospace business because, as we know, UV light has basically disinfects and takes care of the pathogens for COVID-19, and we're already on the second iteration of basically having a device which you can take through the aisles of an aircraft, you roll it through, and basically it disinfects and that aircraft itself without the use of heavy chemicals and so on, which obviously is less than ideal. And we already have a number of customers who used our Generation 1 solution, but we just launched our Generation 2 solution, which in between flights you basically can roll this cart through the aisles and disinfect your cabin in a non-toxic way, which we think is critical. But that was a great idea. I mean, that was that's sort of what continues to inspire me and keeps me motivated. Our aerospace group thought, well, UV light takes care of the COVID-19 virus and can actually help eliminate that from the air. And very quickly, they went from a concept to a solution to a proof of concept to actually having a product ready. All that happened literally in a matter of weeks, and now they're on a Generation 2 solution already. So, that sort of thing is really inspirational for me in terms of how quickly our own teams can pivot, innovate, and come up with solutions the world needs.
And so when you think about things like that and you think about healthy buildings, is your anticipation, as someone who literally has the data in front of him or has access to it, do we get back to a world that looks similar to what we had before, and we just approach it differently from a cleanliness perspective and from a sanitary perspective and a health and safety perspective? Or are there things that have fundamentally changed about work and travel in your estimation?
Well, I think in the short term, certainly things will change for the work and travel. I mean, I think everybody's going to be much more conscious about the environment they're in, who is around them, what's the quality of the air they breathe, what's their risk factor in being in a given environment, whether it's a workplace, in their aircraft, whatever, or stadium, whatever that may be. I think that's going to be with us for a while. Now, is it going to be with us forever? I'm not so sure about that, because I mean, we go back to 9/11, I mean, for a while we didn't really think that anybody would get on an aircraft again, and we thought that air travel was going to be impaired for decades. That's not really what happened. So I'm not really to declare that things are going to be different forever, but I do think that short to medium term things will be different. I mean, people are going to be cautious, and that's even with a rollout of a medical solution. I mean, even if we get an effective vaccine and that gets rolled out next year, I still think that there's going to be an added level of caution like we've never experienced before. And I think that's going to be with us for a while.
How does it change the way you run the company? Like, what have you learned about sort of your company and how it can operate differently? I feel like, and you alluded to this earlier, we were all in sort of crisis mode for the first few months, and then we learned to live with certain aspects of it. We made longer term decisions. What are the things from an operational perspective at Honeywell that you think will be different going forward, be it, how you manage or how you travel or whatever it is?
Well, first of all, we've proven that we can operate the business remotely. I mean, that is something that we can do. I mean, I'm not sure we're as effective as actually being in a team and working together face to face, but we can do it. And I think that's an important learning for us for the long term. Number two is what's really possible in a crisis. I mean, if I told my team, go stand up a new manufacturing facility and do that in 4 weeks, or come up with different innovations and do that in a matter of weeks, not months or years, there is almost zero chance I would get that without a crisis. So I think the opportunity for me is to learn what is it that we did differently without necessarily having the crisis in place to help us innovate and execute with that kind of pace and passion. I think that there's much to be learned from that. I think as we go forward too, probably the clear winners here have been the companies that are the more digital you are, probably the easier it is for you to weather this COVID crisis. The digital companies have done very, very well. And probably the the lesson for me is, we talked initially about sort of the digitization of Honeywell, both internally and externally. And I think for me is I just wish we were even further along. So acceleration of our strategy is something that I would love to be able to do, because I think it very much fits with this crisis. And I think this crisis taught us that the more digital you are, the better off you're going to be.
As I've learned a little bit about you preparing for this interview, I'm fascinated by your background. I'm fascinated by your combination of sort of engineer and management expertise. And obviously, as we've talked about, this is a year like no other. In addition, obviously, to the global pandemic, we've had a massive reckoning around social justice and racial injustice, all of those things. I can't help but think that that's changed you and everyone on your team. I do wonder, from a leader's perspective and from a personal perspective, how do you think it's changed you? How has it changed, if at all, the way you approach problems, especially, again, thinking about your background as both an engineer and a manager?
Yeah, well, I always, my saying is you always learn a lot more and you develop more as a leader through a crisis than through good times. That's undeniable. Luckily for me, I've been through a few crises. I was part of the oil and gas crises that was here in 15 and 16, the 08, 09, and 9/11 and so on. But this one is quite different because not only is it economic crisis, that's pretty clear, but it's a different type of crisis because at least in some of the others, you could actually work with people. There was that team spirit. You could pick each other up because you're with them, you're solving the problem, you're trying to get the company through difficult times and so on. What's different in this one is that you're a bit more isolated. I mean, you communicate through people through Zoom and this media. And I think one of the key things that I learned is that how important it is to stay in touch with people, even if it's through this kind of a medium rather than in person, because there's a level of discomfort, fear. People are scared about their families, scared about their well-being. And I probably, it's always true in any crisis, but maybe this one more than ever, how important communication is and the frequency. And there's no such thing as over communication in a crisis. It can't be done. That the more of it one does, the more important it is. The other thing, and this is maybe a minor thing, but I really think it's so important, is this little device called the camera. How important it actually is to turn that on when you communicate, because as we know, majority of communication is nonverbal. And if I can't see someone, I can only hear them. I'm only getting a very small snippet of that experience. And, those are the little things that we call it. And, some of the things that I think I carried over for some of the other crises are be decisive. I mean, in a crisis, you have to be decisive. You have to make decisions. You can't always search for data, because data isn't generally available, and you have to make decisions. And some of them are good, some of them are not good. And if you figure out that the decision isn't great, reverse it and change course. And then maybe most importantly is don't take the company off the strategic path because you're in a crisis. I mean, sure, maybe the funding is slightly different. Maybe your point of emphasis on the strategic direction is a little bit different. But don't fundamentally uproot what you're doing and where you're going because you're in a crisis. You have to maintain the momentum, not completely lose it. Because if you have to restart it completely, you're going to lose time and effort and energy and money and so on. And I think that's an important element to keep in mind, because sometimes there's a tendency to just reset everything, just act in a panic. And at least my lesson learned is to not do that, to maintain some level of normalcy.
Well, I've really enjoyed this. I've learned a lot. Thank you so much. Best of luck to you. I hope we can keep in touch, keep on this story, because it is a fascinating one, a transformation that was underway and only has accelerated during these very uncertain times. Darius, Adamczyk, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. I enjoyed the conversation. Look forward to seeing you again.